Hi, my name is Leo Cox. Welcome to my channel. What I'm doing with this video is introducing a project that I did sometime before YouTube was a thing. I'm trying to introduce this project to the YouTube audience. And I'm also adding some historical information which tells how and why each individual park came to be. The way Smoky Mountain National Park began was due to Western migration. Western migration had been happening throughout the country even before 1776. It was happening with fur traders, adventurers, entrepreneurs, and families. Families looking for land that they could call their own, where they could raise their own food and then be self-supporting. The first notice that I saw of somebody entering land which currently is part of Smoky Mountain National Park was an item in 1811 when a young man by the name of John Oliver and his pregnant wife Lou Vaney and their young son became the first European settlers to take residence in a part which would now later be called Cades Cove. John must have been pretty good at selecting property because by 1850, the cove was a home to more than 700 people, and it was a real town. It had a school, it had two churches, both of which I have been in. It had the blacksmith shop, it had the corn mill, it had the mill for sawing lumber. It was a pretty good place to live, as a matter of fact, back then. The only other date, the next date that we're going to look at is 1943. 1943 was the year that Great Smoky Mountain National Park was founded. And in that year, they had 145,000 visitors. Now that may sound like a lot of visitors, but you have to remember the number of cars that were on the road and the condition of the highway system. The highway system was much improved. As a matter of fact, US Highway 441 still bisects the park, goes right through the middle of the park from north to south. So things had advanced quite a bit. The next date that we're going to look at is 1950. 1950 was between 1943 and 1950. Again, we had the Great World War. We had a boom times. By 1950, people had money, they were traveling, they were going to places like national parks. And as a matter of fact, as a result, in 1950, the Smokies were hosted 1.8 million people. Sounds like a lot of people, but if you consider that just 30 or 40 years later, about the time that I was shooting my original project, the visitation had jumped from 1.8 million to 8.1 million. And if that sounds incredible, just imagine that currently the visitation is around 14 million people per year. That is more than the next three most popular parks put together. The crowding is being addressed by the National Park System. They're introducing things like shuttle buses to popular places such as Cades Cove. And they are also looking at possible timed entry to popular places and or even times of the year. But we're not looking at that. We're going to go back to 1990, take a look and see how crowded it was back then. And so why don't we just go take a look.
The largest wilderness area in the eastern half of the United States straddles the border of the states of Tennessee and North Carolina. Deep green forests cut by boulder-strewn, rushing streams cover the steep slopes of these ancient mountains. The forests contain more than 100 species of trees and more than 1,400 other types of flowering plants. There are three primary frames of reference relating to time in this land. The first is in terms of billions of years, the time when the land lay beneath an ancient sea waiting to be compressed into stone, then uplifted over countless centuries, finally to be worn down by subsequent glacial scourings and erosion. The second time frame is much more recent. It encompasses the few hundred years that it has taken for the old-growth forests that cover nearly 1/4 of the region to mature. This is also the time frame when Native American Indians occupied the land, but few traces of their lives remain outside the lands of the Cherokee Nation, now preserved at the south end of the region. The third time frame is much like the second, but still shorter. European settlers arrived in the area in the late 1700s and slowly carved out a frontier civilization, the remains of which are preserved along with the stunning natural beauty of the mountains within the borders of Great Smoky Mountains National Park. The mountaintops of the Smokies provide a barrier that forces Atlantic Ocean breezes up and over the mountains, bringing moisture from the air to condense in thick banks of fog and abundant rainfall. The moisture nourishes plant life, which ultimately completes its life cycle through decay, furthering the growth of plants and trees that remain. The combination of fog, plus tons of water and gases given off by millions of trees within the park boundaries, produces an atmospheric haze that gives the Smoky Mountains their name. Unfortunately, the last 50 years have seen overall visibility in the Smokies decrease by more than 60%, primarily due to increased pollution from man-made sources. This increase in pollution continues, despite the progress being made in pollution control measures. Because of its unique natural treasures, Smoky Mountain National Park has been designated as an international biosphere preserve. However, the historic buildings, artifacts, and traditions preserved in the park makes this national park more than just a nature preserve. It's a place to learn about and perhaps appreciate more fully the people who settled this land in the somewhat distant past. At the Pioneer Farmstead, next to the Econo-Lufty Visitor Center, a number of original structures are assembled in a demonstration farm exhibit. Craftspersons produce articles needed for family life just as they were produced in pioneer settings. A short distance from the Pioneer Farmstead, a mill race carries water to the Mingus Mill. Inside this operating mill, visitors can watch as the water-powered millstones grind corn harvested from local fields, the same way it was ground by early settlers more than 100 years ago. The other large concentration of early pioneer structures is located in Cades Cove, a pastoral valley near the western end of the park that was home to more than 600 people in the middle of the 1800s. The road to Cades Cove is a beautiful highway that follows Little River and Laurel Creek. The roadway passes through a magnificent old-growth forest located near the northern border of the park. One of the most powerful reminders of the people that lived here are the simple white-frame churches that remain even today. In plain surroundings, they gathered as a family and worshiped their God. And when their life was ended, the bell in the steeple tolled as they were laid to rest in the cemetery plot behind each church. The witness of their existence is commemorated in gravestones throughout the cemeteries. But even the stone must give way to the forces of erosion that eventually erase even the tallest mountains. Visitor activities at Cades Cove are concentrated around the visitor center, where park naturalists conduct lectures and demonstrations on early life in the cove. The only building in the complex that is still in its original site is the cable mill, still in operation, providing demonstrations of an early mill operation for modern-day visitors. Other structures include a smokehouse, corn crib, and the painted Gregg Cable House, which was probably the first building in the cove utilizing frame construction as opposed to the more common log structures. One other principal structure is the large cantilever barn with its collection of early farm wagons and implements. One of the most popular reasons for visiting Cades Cove is the wildlife that inhabits the valley. A small group of deer seem to glide effortlessly over a fence. The grace of these beautiful animals is accentuated as they bound through the meadow's tall grass. The sound of a running brook blends with the tranquil sight of a young buck with budding velvety antlers feeding on the lush greenery at the edge of the meadow. Smoky Mountain National Park is the most visited park in the national park system. Each year, more than 8 million visitors come to this 800-square-mile preserve. Unfortunately, from crowds on park roads at peak times, it seems that many of them seldom leave their automobiles. Fortunately for hikers, this leaves more than 900 miles of basically uncrowded trails just waiting for exploration by hikers, from novice day hikers to experienced backpackers. This program will sample a few of the more popular trails in the park. Always stop at a park visitor center for current trail and weather conditions before setting out on any hike. The Cades Cove Loop Road is the starting point for one of the most popular hikes in the park. The trailhead for this 5-mile round trip is located at a parking area just off the Loop Road a few hundred yards north of the Cades Cove Visitor Center. Just beyond the trailhead, a footbridge crosses Abrams Creek, a broad, shallow, swift-running stream. The well-worn trail parallels the creek for a half-mile before crossing the first of a number of smaller streams via a log bridge. Reflected sunlight dances in a small, smooth ripple as the water passes over a fault in the underlying rock. The stream continues to widen as it is fed by yet another branch creek. The shallow waters of the stream provide a convenient place for a deer to feed on the succulent greenery growing in the rock crevices along the creek bottom. The trail rises and falls over 3 gentle ridges. Because of the repeated rises, it feels like the trail is uphill to the falls. In fact, the falls are 500 feet lower than the start of the trail back at the trailhead. Save some energy for the uphill return trip. About a mile from the trailhead, the trail cuts through the top of a rocky ridge. This marks the high point of the trail. From the ridge, it is downhill once more to the log bridge over Stony Branch Creek. Then uphill once again to the top of Stony Ridge. The downhill portion from the top of Stony Ridge introduces a new sound to the otherwise still forest. It is the sound of Abrams Falls, audible but not yet visible through the greenery that surrounds the trail. The last log bridge crosses the small creek called Wilson Branch. Just before the bridge, the creek passes over a flat bed of caved sandstone, the underlying rock of these ridges. At last the trail reaches the broad pool at the base of Abrams Falls. Extreme caution should be exercised by anyone entering the cold water. There is a strong undertow at the base of this powerful 25-foot-high waterfall. Return to the trailhead by retracing your steps back to the same trail. The relatively long growing season, rich forest soil, and abundant moisture make the Smoky Mountains a natural garden bursting with a fantastic variety of wildflowers. Early bloomers, such as this jack-in-the-pulpit, can be found at lower elevations as early as April each year. An excellent place to look for early spring flowers is the 3/4-mile-long self-guiding Cove Hardwoods Nature Trail at the Chimneys picnic area. Long before the canopy of leaves fill out and turn the hillside into a shaded glen, a thick green ground cover spreads across the forest floor. From a distance, the overall effect is that of a green carpet, accentuated by small, plain white flowers. Upon closer inspection, the delicate fringes of each blossom of the white-fringed phacelia stand alone as a beautiful flower. The Cove Hardwood Trail passes through one of the largest collections of virgin timber in the eastern United States. From a distance, The white flowers at the side of the trail are mere accents to the scene along this pleasant walkway. Up close, the beauty of a single trillium blossom is magnified when it is repeated dozens of times on the same hillside. Close inspection is the key to early spring wildflowers. Look beyond the large three leaves of the trillium to the delicate rounded white blossoms of squirrel corn, set off by the straight lines in the decaying tree limb. Fragile blossoms of hepatica, a member of the buttercup family, tremble as the gentle breeze touches their stems rising above the forest floor. The first half of the trail follows the hillside as it climbs above the road. The path is generally smooth, but there are some rocky sections encountered on the way to the crest of the trail. The return portion of the trail is all downhill. It's a perfect place for a family to enjoy an early spring hike through stands of massive tree trunks rising above the spring green carpet spread across the forest floor. The forest changes continuously. Return to the same trail a month later. The canopy is filled out, and the forest floor is now covered with larger plants. The pale green floor has been replaced with deep green leaves, and new flowers have appeared. Blossoms fill the branches of dogwood trees growing on the banks of a creek, carrying spring runoff down the mountainside. The sound of birds fill the air, and the pale flowers of early spring are replaced by more colorful blossoms like these violets. The fragile petals of these columbines and the colorful shape of wild iris. Many visitors never venture beyond the main road. They are missing a delightful automobile tour on the Roaring Fork Motor Nature Trail. For motorists, the road is a single-lane marvel through a virtual tunnel of green. For hikers, it is even more. This road is an access road to the trail to Grotto Falls. The trail to Grotto Falls is a 3-mile round trip with an elevation gain of just over 500 feet. The trail is actually the first portion of the Trillium Gap Trail that continues another 5 miles to the summit of Mount LeConte. The elevation gain is gradual, and anyone capable of moderate exertion can easily make the hike to the falls located near the source of the creek called Roaring Fork. Each time the trail crosses a hollow, water draining from the steep hillsides crosses the path in a small stream that is easily crossed on stones that have been placed across the stream bed. It's still necessary to watch your step, as water, moss, and algae can make the rock surfaces slippery. Another reason to watch your step is the tangle of roots on portions of the path where soil has been worn or washed away. The majority of the path is a smooth, steady climb into hollows and around ridges through a mature forest of beeches, maples, and eastern hemlocks. The branches of one of the hemlocks provides a convenient place for a gray squirrel to pause for a mid-afternoon snack. Squirrels are common along the trail, but the trail is also used by another, more exotic animal. A pack train of llamas transports food and laundry 3 times a week to the lodge at the top of Mount LeConte during the season the lodge is open. The trail rounds one last ridge, and a small glimpse of Roaring Fork comes into view as the trail begins to parallel the creek. Through a clearing in the vegetation, hikers can see a small cascade tumbling over moss-covered boulders. Finally, the falls come into view, curving their way around boulders before plunging 25 feet to the stream bed below. It isn't often that you get to have your photograph taken behind a curtain of falling water. A footbridge over the Little Pigeon River marks the start of the 4.5-mile trail to Alum Cave Bluffs. The trail climbs 1,360 feet to a cave formed by a 100-foot-high overhanging rock wall. The old-growth forest, a passage through a rocky arch, and a traverse over a heath bald all help to make this one of the most interesting hikes in the park. Shortly after leaving the trailhead, the trail comes to a second bridge. This is Alum Cave Creek, one of the many small creeks that drain the slopes of Mount LeConte. The trail follows the banks of Alum Cave Creek for the next mile. The angled log and large boulders in the stream were all part of the changing nature of the creek bed, as rocks and debris are swept downstream during floods that follow infrequent heavy downpours. The lush forest is primarily composed of beech, yellow birch, and hemlock. Large Rose Bay rhododendron bushes flank a log footbridge over another small creek. At this point, the trail leaves Alum Cave Creek and follows this smaller tributary called Styx Branch up the mountainside. The trail follows Styx Branch for a quarter of a mile and then recrosses the creek on another log bridge. The third log bridge leads directly to the base of a rock wall that is pierced by an arch large enough for hikers to pass through. Early trail builders built a rough stairway out of flat rocks, making this one of the more unique trail sections in any national park. Notice the relatively sharp edges of the rock faces. This arch was not formed by running water, but by the repeated cracking resulting from water penetrating the rock, then subsequently freezing and thawing. Just above the arch, a cable anchored to the rock wall helps hikers maintain their footing over a rough angled section of rock that is usually wet from water weeping from the adjacent rock wall. With the fourth and final log bridge, hikers can now leave the creek behind as they continue up the mountainside. The trail now comes to a deep ditch caused by a landslide following a torrential rainstorm in June of 1993. Fortunately, no hikers were on this section of the trail when a quarter of a mile of mountainside slid downhill, leaving this raw scar in the surrounding forest. Beyond the landslide, the trail opens up as it passes through a heath bald. Heath balds are areas that have no trees, but are instead covered by flowering shrubs such as this mountain laurel and the bright red blossoms of the catawba rhododendron. This open area with its panoramic views is a popular spot to rest before continuing on the final stretch up to the Alum Cave. A few steps beyond the regular path, hikers can get a better look at the surrounding hills and valleys from a rocky outcropping called Inspiration Point. A short climb up a rough rock face carries hikers beyond the bald and back toward the towering trees of the forest. Emerging from the forest, hikers begin a last steep pitch through water dripping off the face of the overhanging rock that forms the roof of this 100-foot-high amphitheater in the face of the mountain. This is Alum Cave Bluffs. From here, hikers can either return to the trailhead or continue 2.5 more miles to the top of Mount LeConte. Autumn is one of the most satisfying seasons for hiking in the Smokies. Crowds have thinned out, the air is crisp and clear, and falling leaves mingle with bubbling streams to create a beautiful abstract on a living canvas. This is a perfect time to take the 2.5-mile round-trip hike to Laurel Falls. The trail is a broad paved path up the mountainside that was built by the Civilian Conservation Corps in 1935. The trail is rather steep, but the paved surface makes it possible to utilize strollers and wheelchairs with some assistance. On the way up, the hillside is bathed in the glow of reflected light filtering through the canopy of hardwood trees adorned in autumn colors. The lower portion of the trail skirts the south side of the mountain. This warmer, drier slope supports a mixture of oaks and pines. As the trail gains altitude and wraps around ridges, the forest changes to a cove hardwood forest. This area was logged by early settlers, so the poplars, oaks, and maples on these slopes are nowhere near the size of those found in an old-growth forest. Near the top, the trail follows a narrow ledge. The path had to be blasted out of solid rock by the trail builders. About 1.25 miles from the trailhead, the path comes to a pool located at the midpoint of Laurel Falls. In order to get a different perspective on this rocky cascade as it rushes down the mountainside, covered with Rose Bay rhododendrons, hikers can cross over a series of rocks spanning the width of the small midway pool. From the falls, hikers can either return to the trailhead or continue up the mountain to a virgin forest a half-mile beyond the falls. The pleasures of the Smoky Mountains are difficult to catalog. They are the sites of broad mountain vistas and the reminders of pioneering families who came before to wrest a living from this wilderness. There is the stillness of the forest, broken only by the sound of birds or the sound of a rushing stream winding its way down the mountainside on its way to a valley far below. And there are the colors, the bright green hues of spring as the mountainsides return to life, the vibrant colors of autumn as the forests complete another year's life cycle, and the ever-present color of the setting sun as it closes out each day in this magnificent preserve, the Great Smoky Mountains National Park.
If you enjoyed this program, hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss the rest of the series.